Elijah? That's what I forgot.
Elijah's gone. I don't think anyone else has them. So sweet. Elijah's like a he's gone to it.
Oh.
Elijah's
second kid, but he also doesn't leave his room to go work
eventually
We were trying to count to make sure everybody was here, and I'm like, listen. Zane's not here. And then I was like, well, we permanently lost Kevin Pine.
I'm still talking to him like this. It's still a group chat.
Yep. Is he still alive? That's what.
He's so good. He's trying to clean up, but obviously
Stepping right there. Is he still in North Carolina or South Carolina? North Carolina.
It was like a dream world.
Yeah, his mom's there. It's really fun.
When I wash it, gets a bunch of them.
You should use mine for stuff. You should too.
On behalf of the family, I want to thank you for coming today to show your support to them during this difficult time. We've gathered together for this memorial service for Jill Renee Heckard, 57 of Anderson, who passed away February 1st at her residence. She was born March 31st, 1963 in Richmond and resided most of her life in Anderson. Jill graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University with a bachelor's degree in science and was an educator and teacher's aide at several of the local schools in Anderson. Jill is survived by her husband, Tim Heckard, son, Ted Messenger Heckard, siblings, Alan and Jane Messenger, Peggy and Carrie Messenger Reese, Julie and Joel Levener, mother, Oralee Barnett Messenger, several nieces and nephews. She was preceded in death by her father-in-law, David Custer Heckard, mother-in-law, Dorothy Heckard, father, Harold Messenger, and brother-in-law, Ted David Heckard. One of the things that I think helps us at times like this and gives us encouragement and strength and comfort is God's word. I'd first like to read the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And then in Isaiah chapter 40, we find these words. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. In John chapter 11, we find the story of Jesus coming to the tomb of Lazarus, who died some 4 days earlier. Jesus had been notified of the fact that Lazarus was sick, but had delayed his coming, knowing that Lazarus would already be dead when he arrived. I'm reading from John chapter 11, starting with verse 21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. The way Jesus responded to the death of his friend Lazarus gives us insight into ways God the Father might expect us to respond when someone in our family passes away. The scriptures says Jesus wept, the outward expression of sorrow. You'll remember the 3 R's in school: reading, writing, and arithmetic. I still don't know. I guess it's kind of like the apostrophe here and there, and but we all laugh about it. And as we gather here today to celebrate the life of Jill, I want us to think about the 3 R's today that will help us in dealing with her death, and in a sense, learning how to live our own lives. First, we should remember her life. Jill wept because I think he remembered. He remembered the person Lazarus was. He remembered the times they had eaten and fellowship together in the home. And it's good for us to remember the life that Jill lived, the things that she did, the things that she enjoyed, the memories that you have of times you've spent with her. I'm going to share some things that was told to me by her husband, Tim, and then maybe if you want to share a memory after I say what I've got written down here, I'd be happy to open it up for you to share a memory about Jill's life. I understand she was a competitor of swimming in middle school and in high school, and her father took her many times at 6 a.m. for practices, and he would carefully time her on her timing and different things that she was swimming. And she did go to a state swimming competition in high school, and she was pleased when her father passed away to give her dad stopwatch that he had used all those years earlier, in timing her swimming. Jill was a very kind person. She loved kids and animals, and she brought home and adopted several animals across the years, I understand. Tim told me Jill was his best friend for 39 years, and they met in 1981 and married in July 7th, 1984. Now, across the years, of course, they moved maybe 4 or 5 different times, and in those times that they moved, she was always the one that really purposely reached out to meet maybe neighbors, to make new friends, and to get acquainted with people in the neighborhood. Of course, 3 years ago, cancer changed her lives as she went through various kinds of chemo. And during those treatments, Jill made many friends with nurses and doctors. And even at the end of that journey, she told the nurses her concern was for her husband and her son. She personally didn't complain about her personal situation, but she was just concerned about her family. Jill was a devoted mother, got Ted on a swim team and took him to swim meets, I understand, and got him involved in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts across the years. And she would even help mentor the boys. And even now to me, I've not been an outdoors person, so this just amazes me that as a mother, she went on winter campouts with the Boy Scouts. Like, oh my word, I would be freezing out there. But well, some great memories that no doubt Ted has of his mother doing that with him. And as a teacher's aide, Jill mainly helped children with special needs across the years, and she'll be missed by a lot of people. And many people loved her, and she loved many people. So anyone that might want to share at this time, I just want to open it up for you to share a memory of her life. Yes. Sure, if you speak loud enough. Some are maybe watching online, so.
Hold on for that.
Okay, yeah, that'd be.
Well, one thing I always remember about my mom that really touches me is back throughout most of the time in school, she would always, I never really liked riding the bus because the buses I was always on, and there was never really anyone that I knew in my neighborhood.
Okay.
So I would always be basically by myself on the bus. Because of this, I always told my mom about how I didn't like it. I remember for many years since then, she always just drove me to school.
Okay.
Even from middle school all the way up to high school, up until I could drive.
Okay. Wow.
And I always look fondly on that because it was a bit out of her way a lot of the time, but because of how much the bus bothers me, she still did it anyway.
Yeah.
And I also like how eventually later on I was able to sort of return the favor for her because eventually it just sort of flipped around where instead of her driving me to school, I always end up just driving her to and from school.
Okay.
So that was one thing I always remember that I look back fondly on is the fact she'd be willing to do such an inconvenience for me.
Good. Good. That's wonderful. Okay. Anyone else?
I remember the first time I met Jill. Jackson had joined swimming with Ted, and I had never met Jill before, and we were at a practice after school, and we were watching, and I was sitting in the stands, and anybody who knows Jill knows how kind she is, and she always talked to everybody around her. And she introduced herself, and I didn't know who her son was at that point in time, but our boys had been friends for a while. And I'd never met her. I hadn't met her yet, so I was thrilled to meet her. But I could tell you that first time I met her, I thought to myself, whoever her son is a very lucky boy, because you could tell how much she loved her son, because she talked about him. She was so kind. She didn't actually say his name. And then the next time I went to practice and I was waiting for Jackson, I saw Ted and I was like, "Hey Ted, how are you?" And she said, she happened to be standing next to him, and I thought, she's like, "This is my son." And I said, "This is my son." And she's like, "You're Jackson's mom?" And I said, "I am." And so we laughed about it, and I got to know her so much better. And I thought to myself, Ted, if anything, your mother loved you so much. And it wasn't just in the way she took care of you, but it was in the way she talked about you, in the way she was. If there's anything you should remember about her, it's how much she loved you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and you wouldn't be be here unless you had some knowledge of Jill or myself. And I know that Jill loved every one of you and cared very deeply for even people she didn't know. And we're very glad to have all of you here. I've lost the love of my life, but I need to remember that she's not gone. And I expect to have many reminders of that as time goes along. As I said, she's the love of my life, and I thank God for bringing her into my life more than 39 years ago. And one thing that she was very much anticipating and tried so hard at was to have a child. And though she had, I think, 3 miscarriages, the most happy time in her life was on October 6th, 1999, with the birth of Ted. And she made Ted the primary thought in her life, as I've tried to do as well. And now, Ted, though you might not see your mom directly, you should know that her love will never go away for you. And down the road, you will experience that, just like I've experienced it with my brother, who died untimely as well. So, Ted, it's a very sad time for you, but at the same time, it should be a joyous time because your mom is in a better place. She's in heaven, and she will look after you always. Thank you all for coming, and I love every single one of you.
Thank you. Sure.
So we should remember Jill's life and the influence she's had on us down through the years. The second, we should learn that death teaches us to review our own life. As Jesus encountered each of the persons in this account, I believe he caused them to review what was going on in their lives. What were they doing that was so important before death came knocking? Death does that. It levels the playing field. We are on an equal footing. It calls us to review our own lives because the scriptures tell us that we too will soon go through the door that Jill has walked through. A professor one day decided to give a visual demonstration to his class and took out a 2-gallon wide-mouth pickle jar and set it on the table in front of him. He produced about a dozen fist-sized rocks and carefully placed them into the jar. When the jar was filled to the top and no more rocks would fit in, he asked, "Is the jar full?" Everyone in the class answered yes. He reached under the table and pulled out a bucket of gravel. He dumped some gravel in and shook the jar, causing pieces of gravel to work themselves down into the space between the big rocks. And he asked the class, "Is the jar full?" By this time, the class was on to him. "Probably not," one of them said. "Good," he replied. And he reached under the table and brought out a bucket of sand. He started dumping the sand into the jar, and he went into all the places left between the rocks and the gravel. And once more, he asked the question, "Is the jar full?" "No," the class shouted. Then he grabbed a pitcher of water and began to pour it in until the jar was filled to the brim. He looked at the class and asked, "What is the point of this illustration?" One eager student raised his hand and said, "The point is, no matter how full your schedule is, if you really try hard, you can fit more things into it." "No," the professor replied, "that's not the point. The truth this illustration teaches us is if you don't put the big rocks in first, you'll never get them in at all. Well, what are the big rocks in our life? If you really want to have certain priorities in your life, you need to get them in first. Those priorities, those values represent the big rocks. If you don't put them in first, you might not get them in at all. I think you know what we mean by that. It can be things like Christian commitment, Christ-like values, love for your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, and so forth. Jesus asked Martha and then later Mary, do you remember the things I told you? Do you recall the times we talked about eternity? What do you believe about those things? Do you still trust me? Do you still think I can do something about this situation? Do you still believe in me? The third R is we should also learn that death teaches us to refocus our own direction. Suddenly, possessions and plans didn't seem very important to Martha, Mary, and other family members. Have you noticed that when faced with death, our plans and possessions suddenly don't seem important after all? Their perspective had changed. Maybe their beliefs had become a little blurry over time. Perhaps because of the unexpectedness of Lazarus' death, there was uncertainty about life in general. Jesus came alongside them. That, by the way, is what his role is as comforter, and seemed to say, I am the one who has the final answers. James 4:14 says, what is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. I don't think necessarily that Jill was planning to die a few days ago, but since life is like a vapor and appears for a little while and then passes away, it did happen for her just a few days ago. Friends, none of us know what will happen to us either. Our lives are very fragile, aren't they? Proverbs 27:1 reminds us, do not boast about tomorrow, because we don't know what a day will bring forth. Some people are always bragging about what they're going to do, even though they never seem to get around to it. One of these days I'm going to do this, and I'll tackle that later, but later never seems to come. This passage gives us two very significant reasons why we should never presume upon the future. One, life is unpredictable. We don't even know what will happen the rest of today, much less next week or next year. No one can predict the future. And two, life is brief. Our lives are like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Our lives are like a misty fog in the grand scheme of things. Friends, life is too unpredictable and too brief to live it not knowing our final destiny. We count our lives in years, but God tells us in Psalm 90, verse 12, to number our days. All of us are just one heartbeat away from eternity. Our lives are like a vapor. Here 1 minute and gone the next. It doesn't take long to get here, and as we age, we realize what my father told me years ago is true. Time seems to go quicker and faster as we get older, and things just happen so quickly. The writer of Hebrews says it this way, it is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. If all a person had to do was live and then to die, that would not be so bad. We each could do the things we would enjoy and not be concerned about the aftermath, but the Bible makes it clear that each of us will be held accountable for how we live this side of death. So today we are confronted with the reality of death, and we have no choice but to think about serious questions. What are the important things in life? You know, things like job, family, God, and the things that we have. What really matters when life comes to an end? Maybe we think of the retirement package or loved ones. What do I believe about death? About life after death? And then what place does God have in my life? Is he number 1, 5, 10, or way down on the list? Do I believe Jesus died on the cross for me? And if you do, are you living like it matters? A busy father was watching TV. It was an important football game. I thought it was interesting. We're coming up on a game that a lot of people will be watching tomorrow night, but I'm not sure it was quite the Super Bowl game that he was wanting to watch, but his little girl kept bothering him, wanting to go get a treat at the corner store, I guess, a practice that they did regularly. Finally, frustrated at her persistence at this particular time, he reached over and picked up a magazine and quickly thumbing through it, found a picture of the world. Taking his scissors, he cut the picture out, then cut it into a much smaller pieces and handing her the pieces to his daughter and a roll of Scotch tape, he said, put this together, and when you have it looking like the world again, I promise we'll go get that candy bar. Thinking he had pulled a good one and could watch the rest of the game in peace, he sat back down and got totally absorbed in the game. After about 7 or 8 minutes, the little girl came back in holding up a picture of the world all taped back together nice and neatly. He couldn't believe it. How did you do that so quickly? Well, Daddy, I noticed on the back of the picture when you were cutting it up, there was a picture of Jesus being put on the cross. And when I put it in the right place, the world all came back together. As he turned off the TV and they headed out the door, he recalled her words. When you put Jesus in the right place, the world all comes back together. God's intention for life was best expressed by Jesus himself. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but shall have eternal life. You might be saying, I thought we were talking about death and now back to life. That's the point. Jesus came so that we might know what is waiting beyond this life. And in fact, that we might know there is life waiting beyond the grave. You see, in reality, death is never the end, but it's kind of a pause, a doorway through which we must travel. And what waits on the other side is determined by the choices we make this side of that doorway. So I encourage you each today to remember Jill, the life she lived, the influence that she had. Review your own life. Are we making sure our life reflects what we say our priorities are? And then refocus on eternity. Are we ready today to meet God? We should breathe our last breath. I'd like to read the poem entitled The Dash. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came her date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that she spent alive on earth, and now only those who loved her know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love, and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are the things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we would treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be pleased with the things they say about how you spent your dash? I want to pray a closing prayer, and then at the end of the prayer, invite you to join with me in praying the Lord's Prayer together. Father, thank you for this time together and in a sense celebrating and remembering the life that Jill lived. And I just pray that you will help each person here as they deal with the changes that means for them, not being able to talk to her, not being able to visit with her, not being able to ask her questions about maybe this recipe or that particular thing. I realize there's kind of a void there, a change. And yet we're thankful that death doesn't take away those good memories. And as they reflect on those, looking maybe at the picture album or remembering something she said or how she said it, there might be a smile or laughter or even a tear. But thank you for those good memories. Be with each person here and help them day by day to purpose in their heart to live for you and honor you with what they do each day. And now let's pray together. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This concludes the memorial service, and if you want to visit with some of your family or friends, you're free to exit whenever you choose.